Hi, and welcome back to the Flow Show. I'm Joanna Turner, Intuitive Business Mentor. And today we have an episode about change and transformation and metamorphosis, as it will. But before we get into that and I tell you a little story, I want to say, first of all, a massive thank you to everybody that has been tuning in and listening to the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. This is officially episode number 24. 24 is my lucky number. And I just wanted to acknowledge you guys and say thank you so much. And I'm just going to quickly read out all the beautiful places you are from. I'm amazed. So most is the UK. Then we have the US, Australia, Canada, Ireland, Finland, Sweden, the Philippines, Mexico, the Netherlands, Bhutan, hello, Bahrain, and France. I am blown away. That is amazing. So welcome everybody, and I hope you are all managing with my Scottish accent. So I appreciate you being here. And just interestingly, if it is interesting, we have a 83% female and 17% male audience listening. So welcome and thank you all for being here. So that blows me away, and I'm going to keep going with these episodes. I'm really enjoying them. I hope you loved the last episode with Jennifer. She was just incredible. I hope you enjoyed that. So today I'm actually recording this on Easter Sunday. We've had a beautiful walk down the beach, myself and my dog Bella, and I've come home feeling ready to do some recording. This week has been hectic. I don't know if anybody else has been feeling it. We're officially in this eclipse window that started about a week ago with a lunar eclipse and a full moon. I think it was on Monday. And my energy has been absolutely wiped. It's just been really hectic. I don't know if you follow me over on Instagram. If you don't, I will pop the link in the comments below. It's joanna.ya.turner as my handle. And I quite often post what is happening with the energy, screenshots from the Schumann resonance. And the energy has been going absolutely wild this week. And in the last 24 hours, it has been absolutely pumping. So if you have been noticing anything going on with the energy, if you have been extra tired or emotional, also things, the energy, although I'm not an astrologer, I do love and follow many astrologers. The sort of general consensus was that this is a period of time where things are leaving, and the full moon was the ending of things that are no longer serving our soul purpose, our highest expression of ourselves. And that really, if we have been out of alignment with our soul's purpose and, sort of following through on things, then the pieces that are not supposed to be in our lives will just fall away. And we are in this window between the two eclipses. The next one is on the 8th of April. It's going to be massive. Like, the astrologers are all predicting pretty incredible things. It's a sort of hang on to your hats month in terms of energy, the Schumann resonance, the spiking of solar flares and whatnot. So just be very aware. But also the beautiful thing with the new moon and the solar eclipse that's coming up, there is more, while it could be a bit heavy still with all this energy flying around, there is a lot of opportunity. It's like a really fresh start, a new beginning, and it feels good. It feels quite exciting to me. So I'm not worried about it. There could be some disruption to things like your phone service, things like that. So just be aware that there might be some disruption happening, as there is a chance for that over the next few weeks. We're also starting tomorrow Mercury retrograde, so when this goes live, we will be in that period as well for a few weeks. So just have a little bit of extra caution and awareness of all that sort of stuff going on. I don't like to get into fear or think it's anything to be scared of, but I like also the awareness of knowing, like, last week felt heavy at points. I felt like I was sort of swimming through soup, and I just had to give myself a real break from trying to get a ton of stuff done or get through things. It just wasn't going to happen. I think I managed to get that episode with Jennifer up and posted on social, and that was about it. There was not a whole lot of productivity happening at my end. And that's okay, right? We go through these phases, and of course there are phases in flow. So it's okay to take that time. But I am feeling sort of renewed and feeling better and excited to be chatting again. But just also in that moment, this could be a time when you are starting to have a bit of a spiritual awakening. It could have been ongoing for you. But in the moments where that is happening, it can be quite disconcerting, especially if you're in the falling away stage of things and it's maybe the first time that is happening for you. It can be quite confronting, and that might be people, friendships, just literally exiting out of your life. And it's just the end of these things. And sometimes when you start to follow a different path, you start to question things, your interests change, that sort of split just very naturally happens. But I remember when I was sort of more at the beginning of my journey, and some of the relationships with some of my best friends felt like they were falling away, my community was sort of disappearing. It felt quite lonely for a while. I felt a little bit crazy at times. And I remember one time walking around Centennial Park. It was probably on an Easter holiday or something like that. And all around me were sort of people and families and, people spending time with each other. And I was there on my own listening to some sort of spiritual book or podcast, and just sort of was thinking to myself, am I the one that's crazy, or have they actually got this figured out, and maybe the spiritual path is not a better place to be. So I did definitely have a moment of questioning whether it was a good thing to be sort of becoming more isolated or losing things or feeling like I had lost my home as well at that point, my job. Well, I quit my job, but I'd sort of been shedding everything that was the old way. And there is a few moments where you question, is this normal? Is this right? I'd let go of most of my possessions by that point. And, on that path, we can question whether it makes any sense at all. So if you're in that space, I send you lots and lots of love, but it does get better. It does feel like you're going through a sort of death in a sense. It's the death of your old self, your old way of being, your old way of relating to things and people. And that death time can be confronting. And it's also the death of who you used to be, your old identity, the way you showed up, the things you believed, the things you knew to be true are all just cracking and falling away. And it can be really, really confronting. So if you are in that period of time, know that it is totally normal on a spiritual path, on your spiritual awakening, and that it will not last forever. And we're specifically in this period of time, this window where we are, all of us in some way, even if you've been on your path a bit longer, going through another death and rebirth. Some people think it's maybe of your ego, the death, but I don't know if any of us actually can fully think we've gone through an ego death. I think that's just more ego talking, even though I'm pretty sure at one point I thought my ego was gone, but it's definitely not gone. It's still alive and kicking for sure. So know though that it is a season of your life in time, and that it will not last forever. It absolutely will pass, and better, brighter things are on the horizon, and the change is worth it. New community turns up, people that are aligned with your new beliefs and awarenesses and views on the world turn up, because you are going to be in a different vibration, not better or worse, just different. And the right people will turn up that resonates with the new you, the new version of you, your new identity. And sometimes it can feel difficult to show up in your new identity when you're around the old people, because they haven't changed. And so they look at you and they go, wait, you're different. I remember maybe this was the very beginning of part of my spiritual awakening, just being I used to live in Bermuda, and we had this very young party culture. I was there for 6 years in my 20s, and we drank so much every weekend. I barely missed a Friday, Saturday night for many, many, many years. And I would drink like a fish. We'd all get blackout drunk and do stupid things. I'm not proud of it. It's just how life was. And it was good fun at the time, as well as, times where it definitely wasn't good fun and it was terrible. And I knew I was doing harm to my body. And I remember partly to lose weight, which was some of my original motivation, but also I was doing a lot of triathlons at the time. And I decided to quit drinking for 6 months while I trained for my first big triathlon. And I lost a lot of weight. I was obviously training really hard. I remember being very aware of my food and thinking, is this going to make me faster? Was the question as I was consuming things. And if it wasn't, then I wasn't consuming it. And I remember I went to a party towards the end of that time, and I was just drinking probably Diet Coke. I wouldn't do that now, but at the time I was probably just on it having a Diet Coke. And I remember the barman, who was a friend of mine, he just looks at me and he's like, "You've changed, Joe." And I thought, yeah, I just looked at him and I was like, yeah, I have. And that's okay. But the real thing that I noticed was that the people who hadn't changed were the ones that were mad. They were upset, angry that I wasn't drinking. Why aren't you drinking? What's wrong with you? And what I found was that it was more of a reflection of them and their attitude towards themselves, instead of it being about me, because me not drinking was showing them that they maybe felt they couldn't stop drinking. And actually, in those years, while it was all party time and good fun and everybody had jobs, there were definitely some people in our wider circle that were probably more functioning alcoholics and out, most nights of the week, if not all of them. So that was a lifestyle that was possible and available then. And when somebody, the Lone Ranger, decides not to drink for 6 months, it really bothered some people. So and then I went at the end of that 6 months, went out after the day of my triathlon. It was also my birthday. It was Halloween. I did my big triathlon, and then I went out and got absolutely trashed. A few drinks, and after the physical exertion of a triathlon, not drinking for 6 months, I was an absolute mess. And I did not make it to show up for my own birthday brunch the next day. That is, I can be all high and mighty about my 6 months of sobriety, but the aftermath was absolutely a messy, messy situation. And I remember could barely text my flatmate in the next room the morning after saying, "I can't come." And I don't even know if I managed those words or made it make sense, but my friends all went anyway and had a lovely time at my birthday brunch. And I did not go or participate. So just to give you a little bit of the light and dark of that story. But so, yeah, when I was not planning on telling that. But anyway, so we are, we're all on this journey, and there are going to be ups and downs like mine. That was maybe the start of me doing things differently back in the day. I was probably 26, 27 at the time. And you don't know. And I think with the spiritual awakening, as you change and maybe implement boundaries and change some of your ways of doing things or showing up, it can rattle a few feathers, because it's really showing people where they're stuck or not changing. And just know that keep shining, keep doing you, keep doing the work, it will come good. And if these people, even if they do fall away for a time, they might come back around. They might feel like they might sort of come back around again. There were some friends of mine that I felt fell away, and as I was sort of on this spiritual path, and some of them I thought they're never ever going to get it, which is fine, but there was just more of a void between us. And years later, we were still a little bit in contact, just not like it had used to be. And they were asking me questions. And one was like, hey, I found this manifesting stuff. And another one was like, have you heard of meditation? And I was like, why, yes. Welcome. Welcome to the other side. What do you want to know? So it might just be a temporary thing. It might not, but be aware that, there's no right, wrong, or everyone's different. We're on different timelines. There's no way I can be on the same timeline as somebody else. And, my awakening has been slower or later than others. And there'll be other people in their time when is the perfect time for them. There is no, and some will not be on it at all. And that's okay too. So, but just have that awareness of how that can show up for you when you are shifting and changing and wanting to live more in flow and be more in alignment with your purpose. But this month is so exciting because things that are in alignment with your soul purpose are going to be showing up. Things that are not for you will not show up in this window. So that is really exciting, and it can be quite accelerating. It feels like there are opportunities for things to finally break through, for things to feel like they are coming good, if at long last. So there's definitely a sort of energy of that as well. So there's a falling away, but there's also this sort of culmination as well as this beginning, but it's like everything is sort of falling together finally as well. So that is a really nice energy to be in. So welcome to the rebirth era. It's not easy, but I want to tell you another little story about a moment that I had, and I wrote a little story about it at the time, and this was 2017. So some of my stories are a bit older because they just blew me away, and this was a moment that really really made me stop and think, and I thought, wow, this really is magical. So I was in Thailand, and by this point, this is August 2017, I had been on the road with no home address at this point for 2 years, and I was already feeling quite restless, and I kept going from place to place. I was back at this point in Koh Samui in Thailand at this beautiful place that I used to go called the Spa Resort. And it was one of the original ever detox spas in the world that did really quite intense healing and detoxing protocols. And it's the first place I went when I left Bermuda. And I told all my friends I was going to, jokingly told them I was going to rehab. And most of them agreed that probably wasn't such a bad idea, which is how much, we really abused our bodies back in those days when we were drinking. But I actually went there to detox. I didn't at that point, I don't know if I've told you this before, but I didn't know anybody ever in my life who had done a detox. I didn't know anybody in my life at that point who'd ever been to Thailand, let alone done a detox. So it was all very foreign and felt like, but it was a trip I absolutely knew I had to make. And that very first trip I made, I remember I turned 30. I'd already had 2 birthdays, one before I left Bermuda, one when I was back in Scotland. And then the day that I actually turned 30, I was in this spa detox place, fasting on like day 3 or 4 of not eating out of 10, 11 days. And I remember just had been so over my old life and so over the booze and the body stuff. And I was so happy that's where I was finally actually spending my 30th birthday. So I have a very special relationship with that place. It's also the place where I had my first ever, we're getting slightly sidetracked, but my first ever, what would you call it? Healing journey. So obviously I was detoxing for 10 days, which is a spiritual process, even though I didn't think it was. I was just there trying to get my health back on track and lose a few pounds. But for me, it really was the start of a spiritual journey that I also put the brakes on after not too long into it. But I had never done any healing work, and I was so naive. And I hope I haven't told you this before. Maybe I have, but I turned up at in the first couple of days at this place, and I was exhausted. My body, after all these years of boozing and drinking and traveling, I was so tired. And I spent the first couple of days in bed. I don't even think I was just sleeping. I was sleeping, and I think I got up. I ate one meal and I went back to bed. I had nothing left to give before I started this detox. So that's how badly I needed it, and just jet lagged and just felt absolutely horrible. So it was time to definitely do the detox. So after those 10 days, I had seen some flyers, sitting on one of the tables, and it was about family constellations work. And I had no idea what any of this stuff was. I was just there for the detox, and that was it. But I had nothing else to do in the evenings. I was finally coming out of my sort of cocoon of just sleeping and detoxing and not speaking to anybody. I didn't speak to anybody for days. I was just like done. And I finally turned up at this thing, and I was the first person there. And this older guy, maybe in his like late 60s, he just goes, "Hey, why are you here?" And I said, "Oh, it was like a taster session, I guess, like a sort of hour and a half, 2 hours. I thought it would be a little talk and he'd like tell us what he did sort of idea." But it was actually a live demo. And he just looked at me and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Oh, I saw your flyer. I thought it'd be interesting." And he looked at me and went, "No, why are you really here?" And at that point, I just broke down. I didn't know, but I hadn't spoken to anybody for days. I was like just out of it. And he's like, "What is this all about?" And I was like, "I don't know." I had not expressed an emotion, and I probably hadn't cried for like 3 or 4 years at that point. Like I was so closed off, so shut down. I didn't know. And that question opened the floodgates. And I remember him sort of rubbing my back and saying, "Oh, well, maybe we'll use you as the demo tonight." And I was just like, no. I don't know what is happening. I don't cry. What is going on? I don't know what this family stuff is. I've never done any healing work. And I just was like, that is a step too far. At least I knew in myself that would have been too much. But I sat and witnessed this family constellations work in pure amazement. And I knew I had to have a session with this guy. And that was my first ever healing session, maybe a week or two later. And we went, in Bali, everyone's got these huts. You go back to their hut. And we were there for about 4 hours working through family constellation stuff. And at that point, honestly, I didn't even know what a chakra was. Because he said, "Oh, your chakras aren't open. We can't do this today. We need to open your chakras or something." I don't know. And I just looked at him and I was like, "What's a chakra and how the heck might one open them?" To be able to do this work. I just didn't know anything at all. So in all of my naivety, but we went through this process, and he had these little figurines to represent the family members instead of humans. It can be done obviously in a group with humans representing different family members. And what happens is you sort of, if it is humans doing it, you open up a sort of portal and allow the soul of the family member being represented in the it's a sort of spiritual psychodrama type situation, and you play it out among the characters, and you take on the soul of the family character being brought through if you're doing it in a big group with people, which is incredibly powerful. And I've gone on to do quite a lot of that since. But in this private session, instead of using humans, we used little figurines. And he would say, pick 2 to represent your parents, pick 2 to represent your grandparents, pick 2 to represent, or 4 to represent your grandparents. And, you know, we went through the family constellation like that. And I remember just putting my hand over, you know, one of these little figures and bursting into tears. And he's like, what's going on? I was like, I feel this grief. And I felt all of this grief, and I sobbed and I sobbed. And when I would take my hand away from that little figurine, the tears would stop. The grief stopped. It was just done. And so we moved these little figurines around. I felt the intense energies that I'd never felt before. I was so green. And I remember we did one that was really interesting, and it was a couple of generations back. And I put my hand over these little figurines, and he said, what are you feeling? And I said, it's the most intense grief I've ever felt in my life. And he said, what is it? Do you know what the feeling is? I said, I've lost my 2 sons. I've lost my babies. And I cried and I cried and I cried, and I expressed all of this grief. And it was so intense. I didn't know what that was at the time. I have now come to discover, after, you know, getting out of that and calling home and being like, Mom, did your gran ever lose 2 children in the war? And I knew it had been in the war as well. And I'm like, how do I know this? What is happening? I didn't remember the story. And my mum said, oh, actually, well, now you come to say it. My grandmother, I got home from school one day, she was just a little girl, and my grandmother and my mother were in the kitchen reading a letter, and it was our 2 telegrams. And these 2 telegrams had arrived on the same day. This is in the Second World War. And they were telling my great-grandmother that both of her sons were missing in the war. And that was the pain and the grief that I had processed in Thailand, and I didn't even realize. And they were sort of poring over these telegrams and said to my mum, no, don't you worry about anything, everything's fine, and sort of told my mum to go away. She was just a little girl. And later on she found out what was going on and saw the telegrams. But yeah, imagine finding out that both of your children in the same day were missing in the war. So this was the unprocessed grief of my great-grandmother that I was crying about in Thailand. And just unbelievable. They both ended up being found. I did actually tell the story of one of them back in the Flow episode, the one that was his naval ship went down and he ended up in a hospital in Cape Town. So I did tell that story before. And the other one ended up, he had collapsed when he was on shore again in the Navy in, I think it was Melbourne, and he had collapsed in a public toilet with was it pneumonia or something going on? Or there was something else. I think it was something else, but it was something that he was really unwell, and they ended up taking him up to the Blue Mountains to a sanatorium up there. And he had sort of because he was no longer in his ship and they couldn't find him and all this kind of stuff, he was presumed lost as well at one point. So anyway, he survived as well. But and that's how he ended up living in Australia for many years and meeting his wife there. So both the brothers ended up sort of being stranded in these different countries, one in South Africa, one in Australia, and never left. So quite interesting. But the loss was still felt by her, even though they both survived. She didn't know that at the time. So that was pretty heavy. And then at the end of this 4-hour session, just bawling my eyes out and moving these little figurines around and feeling things I had never in my life felt, didn't know I was capable of feeling. knowing things that I didn't know I was capable of knowing. At the end of this session, I remember we just went outside. He opened the door of this little hut, and there was this massive, I mean, it was Thailand, so they do get tropical rain, but there was just this big crack and a downpour. And he actually said he'd never felt such intense energy in a session, but he didn't want to tell me because I was so new. And he said, he was like, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And I just was like, looked at him and I was like, this isn't like normal. Didn't have a clue. Anyway, that was that. So anyway, that was my very first work of any type. And then the next work at that same place was another guy who did like hypnosis work, and he did sort of regression-y hypnosis stuff. And I went off to have a session with him, and he took me back to these lifetimes, crazy lifetimes. And again, I was at that point still an accountant, and I remember him we were doing this release work, and he's like, I release my the blocks I have in my spiritual power. I release my, I allow my spiritual healing gifts to be fully released. And I was like looking at him in this sort of trance back in this past life, but also just sort of thinking, I'm an accountant. I'm not a spiritual healer. What are you talking about? Again, I've been so green. It was wild. One of those lifetimes I was being burned at the stake for being a witch, and my current father was my little boy in that lifetime. And I remember looking down and had caused him so much pain, obviously losing his mummy, and vowing not to use my spiritual gifts because they caused the people I loved too much pain. And that was one of the things I had to release, was that vow from that past life to shut it all down. And so he helped me start to open up my spiritual gifts through that through the past life. And then there was another past life. I did a few sessions with him. I think it was the same one, but I saw myself as a Native American medicine man, and all of the men from our village had gone off to fight the white man, and I had been left with all the women and children, and my wife was pregnant, and the men, the white guys got to our camp and killed everybody in front of me, including my little boy and my pregnant wife, and they killed me last in this past life. And again, I vowed, one, that I felt I had let down my whole tribe because I wasn't able to save them. I'd let down my family, my wife. I couldn't protect my children. And in that lifetime as well, I vowed not to open up my healing skills or to have a family because I couldn't protect them, and I couldn't save my children and those I loved the most. Whew, quite heavy. But yeah, so he had me again. I release my healing powers. I release, these vows I've made, and it was just incredibly powerful work. And again, this opening of remembering who I am and my spiritual gifts and what I do. But I had to go through the healing of those lifetimes where I'd vowed to shut it down. I had no intention of telling you this story today. Anyway, that is just what's happening. Oof. Anyway, I was in Thailand, and there's lots more stories from that place. It's one of these places where there's a lot of people are drawn there, obviously, a lot of spiritual healers and teachers, and I really got a chance to experience things that I just did not have a clue about. I used to wander around there with a little notebook because I felt like I was given mind-blowing advice every 5 minutes, whether it was a recipe or I remember being told that amalgam fillings in your teeth weren't healthy. And I had no idea. I remember just looking at somebody being like, what are you, like, I had no idea. And so I've made another vow to get them out when I got back to Sydney with a holistic dentist. And it took me years and years to find the right place to do it and the right time and a lot of money to do so. So, but yeah, I remember just the awarenesses that I got in that place were really mind-blowing. But I also kind of forgot all about it for a few years. I went back to Sydney and took on another job as an accountant. And I remember finding that little book years later and going through it and going, wow, I didn't know I knew that. Wow, had they really told me that? And it was just mind-blowing because I'd sort of forgotten a lot of it. I'd gone back to my old life and my old job and forgotten that I knew all these things, and I had been sort of given all this beautiful education, and I'd gone back into my old life. So anyway, we digress again, but I was back in this place. So that was the first time I went there. It was 2010, end of 2010. I went back in 2011 for another couple of months. And then I went back several times. I was back in 2017. I was back there at the last time I was there was the beginning of 2019. So each time I'd go for several months and sort of just spend a lot of time there, eat at the Raw Cafe for the 2 months I was there. Didn't stray very far away. You know, there's a few other places nearby that had really good food as well, but I just sort of stayed in my little place, did lots of yoga, saw all the healers I possibly could, found an amazing acupuncture lady that I went to a lot, and just did my healing and did a lot of detoxing. So it's a very special place. If you're looking for somewhere to go and spend a bit of time, they've actually, when I was there, it was very, very basic. And in the last couple of years, it's undergone quite a dramatic refurb, I believe. And it's much, much nicer and a lot more modern. So if you are looking for somewhere, check out the Spa Resort in Koh Samui. But anyway, so I was back there in 2017 and doing all my detoxing again. And there was a morning I was meditating in my Akashic Records, and I had been feeling quite restless. Like I'd said, I'd been on the road for years at this point, and I was really asking the question, why can I not be in one place for too long? Like I would literally get this like squirmy feeling in my skin, and I had to move on. So I'd be there for a month, 2 months, or a week sometimes, and I would get this little nudge, time to go, you're complete, and I would move on to the next place, just intuitively following the breadcrumbs and the journey, and trying to trust. But obviously at this moment in time, I was feeling restless and I didn't want to be on the road anymore. And that was 2 years in, and it lasted another 2 years. But the message that I got in the Akashic Records that morning was that, so I was wanting a home. I wanted a home base, and obviously everywhere I went when I was traveling, I'd be like, could I live here? I think I could live here. I'd be in LA. I'm like, I think I'm going to live here. I started my my US visa application. Then I went to San Diego. I was like, oh, I think I'll live in San Diego. Then I went to Santa Barbara. I was like, oh, I could definitely live in Santa Barbara. Then I'd be like in New York. I'm like, maybe I should move to New York. Then I'm like, Tulum. It's definitely Tulum. I could definitely live here. And then I'd be in Bali. I'm like, no, I think I should live in Bali. And then I'm like, no, let me go. And oh, it was ridiculous. So everywhere I went, I was like, maybe I could live here. Anyway, so part of my worry at the time was, if I did get a house, I worried that I would be restless. If I really committed to being in one place, what would happen? And it's quite a real worry for some people, especially when they have a big dream and they want something. And often one of the blocks to manifesting something is a little worry at the back of your mind. If I get it, what if I'm still not happy? And that's quite heavy too. I remember I had a client who was like, Jo, I have my vision board, but I'm miserable. And part of me was terrified of getting everything I wanted, in case when I got there, it wasn't really the answer. And then I didn't know what else to do. What was I going to do if I found out that this thing that I thought was going to give me all of the happiness and all of the things that I was looking for, what if it didn't give me that? And I was terrified of that. And I'll maybe finish the story once we get over this bit. So that was the concern. And when I dropped into my Akashic Records, I see a vision of a chrysalis. And there is a caterpillar squirming around in this chrysalis. And the words that I hear are that I'm going through a metamorphosis. And that I need to be moving, physically moving locations as I changed and my body changed. And that once I shed my skin and emerged as a butterfly, I would easily settle down and be happy. So that was a nice message to hear. And I could really relate to the caterpillar squirming around in this chrysalis trying to break out of it, because I literally felt like that. I was trying to sort of almost shed a layer of my own skin. Like I didn't feel settled and comfortable. So while that was a nice vision, I appreciated that coming through the Akashic Records for myself. I still wasn't quite satisfied. So I actually asked for a sign. And I did an online challenge. It was like a free challenge about asking for a sign from the universe, which I might resurrect because it was so fun to do. And one of the signs that you're in flow is when you get a sign, which is really cool. So I asked for the sign, and as you do when you ask for a sign, you let go of the notion of it showing up in any particular way, right? We cannot control that stuff. So I closed my Akashic Records and I came down for breakfast at this beautiful raw food cafe, and I always would get the papaya with lime, and it was just sublime, and usually a coconut or a sort of smoothie of some sort. But it was just the best food. So fresh, so gorgeous. Anyway, I went down for breakfast and I was sitting at a table with 4 other people. We have our feet in the sand. It's right on the water. So beautiful. And we'd been sitting there for a few minutes and this little girl appears at my side. She did not come over to speak to anybody else at that table, just me. And that was a little bit strange. I, at that point in my life, had probably not spoken to a child for many years. I didn't know anyone with kids at that time, and she just appeared at my side. And it turns out she's 7 years old and her name is Jasmine. And she is holding what looks like a centipede. And she's sort of playing with it in her hands, letting it turn over in her hands like it's her pet. And I'm just like looking at her and I was like, is that safe? My experience with sort of big centipede caterpillar-y things in the Amazon was that they were poisonous. And I know they have sort of like poisonous ones in France as well that can kill your dog if you're not careful. So I was just very cautious, and I said, is that safe? Like, should you be playing with this thing? And this little 7-year-old looks at me and asks if I'm scared. And I said, yes, a little bit. And she just looked at me straight in the eye and she said, there's nothing to be scared of. He's just a caterpillar. And in a few days or weeks, he'll be a beautiful butterfly. And I just looked at her and I was like, oh, sure, of course he will. And I said, thank you so much for coming over and telling me that. And I think I asked her what this caterpillar's name was, and she said it was called Tom. And I went, oh, wonderful, cool. And off she went, just disappeared. And I had never seen children at this resort before, and I never saw her again. That was it. She just disappeared. And I mean, this was minutes later. Literally asked for the sign, and then this beautiful child turns up. And I love children. They follow their intuition. They're in flow always because they're so present. And she was just trusting the message that she was sent and came over to the lady. to tell me that. And I was like blown away. The synchronicity, and I remember just being quite stunned by that, and just being like, wow, this stuff is way beyond me. This is really, really incredible. And anyway, the end of that story is that 2 years later, I did end up in my vision board life with a brand new, beautiful home with a swimming pool, 2 blocks from the most stunning beach, living my best vision board life, had my dog. And I did go through a period of, oh my God, I'm not happy. I have everything I want and I'm not happy. And it was like the worst nightmare. And because I'd all along, you know, it's really the integration fear. And we'll talk more about integration another time. But I was having to integrate all of the shifts and changes I'd been through. And when you stop moving, so when I was on the road, I didn't really have to fully face up to fully integrating all of my shifts and changes and shedding of the skins and who I'd become and all of this stuff. And I kept telling myself, when I have a home, I'll do this. When I have a home, I'll do that. You know, take the art class, get a dog, you know, find my man, all that stuff. And I had the house, I was taking the art classes, I got the dog, I did all the things. And there was still something that felt a little bit empty. And that was the worst nightmare, because I was like, oh no, I have everything I possibly want in the physical, but there's still something missing. And so that led me down a deeper path to figure out what that piece was. And there was yet another layer of feeling not quite good enough, or that I didn't quite deserve my vision board life that I had created for myself. So that obviously took some layers of working through, and a giant dose of mushrooms. Okay, so with a psychotherapist. Anyway, that is another story. But what I'm saying, what the whole point of this is, one, there is no right or wrong place you can be. You know, wherever you are on your journey, if you are in the chrysalis, if you're squirming around in there, if you're shedding your skin, if you're losing people, if you're at the beginning of everything, if you're further along and you've got your vision board life and then you're questioning everything like I did, like my other client did, you have to go back to the drawing board for a minute and reassess and be like, actually, what is it that I really want? You know, we don't want to be chasing these vision board lives that aren't our deeper truth. And there's no point being that person who has it all and then still being miserable. Like, that's not cool too. So wherever you are in the journey, I'm sending you so much love today. And yeah, if you need any support during this time, let me know. I would love to know your experience as well of this eclipse. Have you noticed things falling away? Have beautiful soul aligned things turned up during this time? I would love, love, love to know that. And yeah, if you are looking for business mentorship with a very spiritual twist, more in the realms of getting you energetically matching to your big dreams that are truly soul aligned, so you don't end up with your vision board and being miserable, then I am available. I do have a free consultation available to see if I can help you, if we're a good fit, and we can chat about what that looks like. It's a no obligation call. You can book that. The link is in the show notes. And I would massively appreciate if anybody, if you like this, shared it, hit the follow button. It makes a huge difference to us. A review would be wonderful. And if you share it on your stories, I will share you back. And come join me on Instagram. And if you have any questions or concerns about anything I've mentioned today, just let me know. We went off on a couple of little tangents there. I love that I never know what's going to come out of my mouth. That's why we're here, and that's why we're doing it. And I'm showing up anyway. and telling the stories. And I hope they support you in this interesting time. And just remember, the more that you can surrender, the more that you can trust in the flow of things, the easier this time will be for you. The more we resist the change, the more we cling on to the past, the more we, try and cling on to the people that are meant to leave, the harder it's going to be. So allow what's meant to come, allow what's meant to leave, and that's it. Wishing you lots of love, and I'll see you in the next episode.